whom you first met at the age of 15, that you are his biological daughter.
Yes, Your Honor.
You say her biological father is David Alston.
This is your dad's brother. So aunts and uncles, and they embraced me like if they knew me from day one. So I have always assumed that Mr. Alston was my dad because his name was on my birth certificate. But at 15, she told me that Mr. Holmes can be my dad, a father figure to me since from day one.
Because Miss Alston's mother, back in the day, she was like fast. 2 days later after I met her, I had sex with her. A couple days later, I asked her to come back and we had sex again. So it was kind of like a booty call until 15 years later. So I kind of felt that she wasn't mine because I didn't even know that she existed until that time.
Did you?
When the echoes of that verdict faded, silence filled the courtroom like a heavy fog, the kind that wraps around every heart present and forces everyone to face themselves. The mother's sobs trembled through the room, while the child's small, curious eyes darted between the adults. Too young to understand, but wise enough to sense that something sacred had just shifted. Judge Lauren Lake did not rush to speak. Her experience had taught her that silence often carries its own justice, the kind that law books cannot define, but hearts can feel. She let that silence breathe because sometimes the greatest truth is found in what remains unsaid. It is in these moments that her courtroom transforms from a space of legal arbitration into something far more profound. A sanctuary for the human spirit. The DNA results may end a case, but they rarely end the story. That's where the true journey begins. In the aftermath of truth, when the people involved must decide what to do with what they've just learned. For some, truth becomes closure. For others, it becomes the start of new pain. And for a rare few, it becomes the foundation for forgiveness. The grieving mother in this story had come seeking clarity. What she found instead was a deeper form of truth, one that stripped away the illusions of certainty and left behind only love. Her tears, though born of loss, were also a form of release. She wasn't crying for what she lost. She was crying for the years she spent not knowing. Judge Lauren Lake leaned forward, her tone softer now. The voice, not of a judge, but of a mother. "You've carried this pain for so long," she said gently. "Now you know the truth. It doesn't change your love. It only changes what you understand." That moment, like many others in her courtroom, was more than legal resolution. It was emotional resurrection. And that's what makes this courtroom so extraordinary. It isn't merely the place where evidence is tested. It's the place where the relationship between law and justice reveals its deepest meaning. In legal philosophy, the concept of justice in jurisprudence, scholars often debate whether law should prioritize fairness or compassion. But in Judge Lake's courtroom, that debate finds its answer in action. Law without empathy is cold. Justice without truth is blind. Here, both coexist in fragile harmony. In this space, evidence is not just paperwork. It's people's lives laid bare. And every test, every testimony becomes a thread in the larger fabric of humanity. The DNA test, though scientific, often feels spiritual. It strips away the stories people tell to survive and replaces them with reality. That's why people regret taking DNA tests, not because the science is wrong, but because the truth it reveals cannot be undone. Once exposed, it demands to be lived with. There is something hauntingly poetic about watching that moment unfold. The unsealing of an envelope that has the power to redefine a lifetime. You see, a DNA test is not just a test of genetics, it's a test of courage. The mother's trembling hands, the defendant's silent prayers, the judge's steady gaze. Each one becomes part of a timeless tableau of truth-seeking. In another corner of this emotional landscape lies the story of adoption, of children searching for roots, and parents searching for redemption. Episodes like these often reveal the deepest intersections between law, love, and legacy. Families reunited, secrets exposed, hearts mended. All in a single ruling that carries both the weight of science and the grace of forgiveness. The brilliance of Judge Lauren Lake's presence is that she never allows the courtroom to become sterile. Even when the law demands detachment, she offers humanity. Her empathy doesn't cloud her judgment, it clarifies it. She reminds the audience and everyone standing before her that justice is not about punishment, it's about restoration. That's why the Divorce Course podcast and the Game Changing Attorney podcast often reference her as an example of how modern law must evolve. Not as a tool of control, but as a process of healing. In a world obsessed with winning cases, Judge Lake insists on winning people back to themselves. In this episode, when the grieving mother learns that her biological connection to the child may not exist, the question becomes, what happens now? Does love vanish when DNA says otherwise? Or is love something beyond blood? Something that thrives even in the absence of proof? Lauren Lake's wisdom rises in these moments. She leans forward and says softly, "Family isn't always defined by DNA. Sometimes it's defined by devotion." Those words hang in the air, more powerful than any verdict. They remind us of something that Celebrate Recovery testimonies echo, that forgiveness and grace are the ultimate forms of justice. What the mother learns in that courtroom is what millions watching from home also feel. Truth can hurt, but it can also heal. The law gives us the structure to face the truth, but the heart gives us the strength to accept it. And that is where the truth changes everything. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom doesn't shy away from the complexity of life. It embraces it. The cases she presides over aren't just about who fathered a child. They are about who chooses to stay, who chooses to forgive, and who chooses to move forward. Her approach bridges the gap between law and humanity, much like the principles explored in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where each story isn't simply analyzed, but lived. Every case becomes a mirror reflecting the flaws and beauty of the human condition, the idea of adverse inference in the Evidence Act, where missing proof implies hidden guilt, takes on a new emotional layer here, because in this courtroom, the evidence that matters most often isn't missing. It's just invisible. It lives in the tone of a mother's voice, in the hesitation of a man who doubts, in the tears of a woman seeking redemption. These unspoken truths form the real testimony, the kind that no statute can capture. Through these cases, the audience begins to see how the Supreme Court of the heart often overrules the technicalities of law. DNA results might settle biology, but they can never dictate love. The child support battles that unfold in this environment are never just about money. They're about acknowledgement, belonging, and emotional responsibility. As the judge listens, her questions cut deeper than the surface. Do you love this child? Are you willing to be there, regardless of what the DNA says? In those words lies the essence of her courtroom. Accountability wrapped in compassion. That's why viewers around the world feel connected to her show. It is not just entertainment. It's education, moral, legal, and emotional. It's a living reflection of the justice system at its most human. Even podcasts and law programs often draw from her rulings as examples of relationship between law and justice in motion. Her work demonstrates that the real test of justice isn't how well we follow the law, but how courageously we follow the truth. The DNA test cheating stories that make headlines often reduce people to statistics. But here, Judge Lauren Lake restores their humanity. She looks beyond betrayal to see the broken hearts behind it. Her rulings don't just declare who's right or wrong. They guide people back to dignity. For those who step into her courtroom, it's never just about the verdict. It's about finding peace after chaos. Like the mother in this case, broken, yes, but no longer lost. The child, innocent yet now protected by love that transcends paperwork. And even the opposing party, learning that sometimes the law doesn't punish, it purifies. As the episode unfolds, we watch redemption bloom in unexpected places. The grieving mother, once filled with anger, extends compassion to the woman she once blamed. The defendant, once defensive, lowers her guard and admits her fears. And through it all, Judge Lake's voice remains steady, guiding, comforting, and reminding them that truth, no matter how painful, always brings freedom. The Celebrate recovery testimonies that echo through communities mirror this same journey. People step forward to share how truth, raw, unfiltered, and sometimes unbearable, became their first step toward healing. This courtroom, too, becomes a stage for those same confessions. For every DNA test that brings pain, there's another that brings relief. For every heartbroken family, there's one that finds new strength. Judge Lauren Lake often says, "The truth doesn't destroy families, secrets do." And every case she presides over proves that statement true. It is this profound understanding that makes her court not just a legal institution, but a place of transformation. By the time the episode closes, the air feels lighter, not because the pain is gone, but because the truth has been spoken aloud. The grieving mother smiles through tears, holding the child not as proof of blood, but as proof of love. The other woman, once judged, now feels seen, not as a defendant, but as a mother. And Judge Lake, standing between them, becomes a symbol of what the concept of justice in jurisprudence was always meant to be: the restoration of wholeness. This episode doesn't end with applause or celebration. It ends with reflection, because when truth changes everything, it doesn't just change what people know, it changes who they become. As the credits roll, we hear Judge Lake's final words: "Justice is not the end of pain, it's the beginning of peace." And in that single line, the purpose of every case, every verdict, every DNA revelation becomes clear. Justice is not about proving who's right, it's about guiding people back to what's real. When the lights of the courtroom dimmed and the audience faded into quiet reflection, what lingered wasn't the verdict, it was the transformation. That is the power of truth. It does not end in the courtroom. It begins there. The story that unfolded before Judge Lauren Lake wasn't merely about parentage or evidence. It was about the human soul's relationship with truth, justice, and love. As the grieving mother walked out of the courtroom, she carried no piece of paper to validate her loss. The DNA results had denied her the comfort of a biological bond. But what she gained instead was far more profound. Emotional clarity. She realized that the love she had for the little boy wasn't dependent on shed blood. It was something deeper, something divine. The instinct to nurture, to protect, to give meaning to a life touched by tragedy. Judge Lauren Lake watched her leave with quiet admiration. She knew that the law could not heal hearts, but it could illuminate the path toward healing. That is why her courtroom often feels like both a court and a confessional. Here, the evidence is factual, but the verdicts are human. The relationship between law and justice is often discussed in legal philosophy, but few places demonstrate it as vividly as this courtroom. Law seeks order, justice seeks balance. Law defines guilt, justice defines growth. Judge Lake's rulings bridge this divide, reminding us that true justice is not achieved through punishment, but through understanding. In the closing reflection of the episode, the camera pans over the courtroom, empty now except for the echoes of testimony. It's as if the walls themselves have absorbed the lessons learned, that DNA tests may end confusion, but they also begin revelation. Across countless episodes, Judge Lauren Lake has shown how people regret taking DNA tests not because they uncover lies, but because they expose the truth behind their pain. Once the results are revealed, there is no returning to ignorance. There is only forward, toward acceptance or away from it. The courtroom becomes the stage where this emotional migration takes place, echoing the same human confessions heard in Celebrate recovery testimonies. Stories where people stand before others, vulnerable yet strong, proclaiming that truth broke them, but also built them anew. In legal theory, there's a concept called adverse inference in the Evidence Act, which allows a court to assume that a missing fact or withheld evidence would likely harm the person hiding it. But in Judge Lake's courtroom, The adverse inference often applies not to missing documents, but to missing honesty. When truth is withheld, pain multiplies. When truth is spoken, healing begins. The grieving mother's story becomes a modern parable, a living example of how the concept of justice in jurisprudence transcends the written code. Justice, after all, is not a mechanical act. It is a moral journey, and in this courtroom, that journey always begins with truth. Her son, though gone, found redemption through the confirmation of love. The child, though biologically uncertain, found belonging in two hearts, now united by compassion rather than conflict. Even the opposing mother found peace. Not because she won, but because she was finally seen, finally understood. This is what Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom teaches: that justice without compassion is incomplete. Every episode is a lesson, not just for those who stand before the bench, but for those who watch from afar. It shows how truth can be weaponized or sanctified, depending on how we receive it. For some, the DNA envelope feels like a bomb. For others, it feels like deliverance. As the narrative continues, the episode transitions from its legal conclusion to its emotional aftermath, the kind of moment that belongs not in court transcripts, but in the human heart. The grieving mother visits the child she once doubted. She kneels down, holds his small hands, and says softly, "You'll always have a place with me." That line is not written in law. It is written in love. Judge Lauren Lake's voice narrates over the final montage, reflecting the tone of the Truth Changes Everything podcast. When we seek the truth, we must also prepare for what it asks of us. Because truth doesn't only expose others, it exposes us. That statement defines the moral spine of her work. Every DNA case, every family torn by lies or misunderstanding, reflects this universal pattern. Truth is the most dangerous, yet the most necessary form of healing. Her approach connects deeply to modern discussions in legal ethics and emotional intelligence. The relationship between law and justice that scholars analyze in academia is lived out in her courtroom daily, where statutes meet stories and reason meets emotion. But perhaps what makes her so distinct is how she allows space for faith and morality without compromising legal integrity. She reminds us that truth without mercy is cruelty, and mercy without truth is chaos. In her hands, the law becomes more than a set of rules. It becomes an instrument of restoration. In reflecting on this double episode, one realizes that it's not just about parentage or evidence. It's about identity. DNA may define ancestry, but it cannot define destiny. The little boy Zion becomes a living metaphor for hope, a reminder that even when loss tries to erase lineage, love rewrites it. The episode mirrors the narratives discussed in the Divorce Course podcast and the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where emotional intelligence and legal insight intersect. Both platforms explore how modern attorneys and judges must evolve beyond mere litigation toward compassion-centered practice. Judge Lake embodies that evolution, a leader who transforms jurisprudence into empathy in action. In one striking moment near the end, she looks at both women and says, "The law can tell us who we are, but only love can tell us who we become." That single sentence distills the essence of her philosophy. As the music swells in the background, soft, almost spiritual, the camera captures the quiet dignity of everyone in the courtroom. There are no villains here, no winners or losers, only people, broken yet brave enough to seek truth. This is what separates Judge Lauren Lake's court from other televised trials. It is not about spectacle. It is about sincerity. The cases she presides over remind the audience that truth is not entertainment. It is enlightenment. The adoption stories, full episodes, the cheating stories, the child support battles, all carry the same message, that every search for truth begins with pain, but ends with peace. In one way or another, everyone standing before the bench is asking the same question: am I enough? And Judge Lake, with her calm voice and piercing wisdom, always answers, "You are." That's why millions tune in. Because beyond the DNA results, beyond the legal jargon, this courtroom represents something universal. The human desire to be seen, believed, and forgiven. Even as the credits approach, the emotional afterglow remains. The grieving mother, once hollowed by uncertainty, now finds meaning in mentorship, helping other families facing similar trials. The young woman, once defensive, begins her own celebrate recovery journey, sharing her testimony about how facing the truth saved her soul. These post-verdict transformations reflect what recovery advocates often say: you're only as sick as your secrets. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom gives people permission to release those secrets, to speak, to cry, to confess, and in doing so, to heal. For those studying the concept of justice in jurisprudence, these moments provide something academic texts rarely capture: the living heart of justice, the understanding that law is not an end in itself, but a bridge from pain to peace, from confusion to clarity, from silence to truth. This is why her courtroom deserves the description often used by her followers: a ministry wrapped in a legal robe. As the final scene fades, the voiceover delivers the closing reflection, one that could belong in both a sermon and a philosophy class. In every case, I see more than evidence. I see humanity. And when humanity meets truth, healing begins. The music fades into quiet, leaving only the echo of that truth. Haunting, hopeful, and holy, the truth changes everything. Yes, but as Judge Lake reminds us, truth also heals everything it touches when we allow it to. In the end, this double episode stands as a modern fable about love and law, loss and legacy. It speaks to the timeless struggle of human beings trying to reconcile their emotions with reality. It shows us that even in the Supreme Court of the heart, evidence alone is not enough. Compassion must testify too. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom isn't just a place where cases are closed. It's where souls are reopened. Her work sits at the intersection of philosophy, psychology, and faith, the embodiment of what the relationship between law and justice truly means when brought to life. For those who watch, it becomes more than a show. It becomes a reflection of their own unresolved truths. It whispers to every viewer who's ever wondered about forgiveness, about family, about truth, that it's never too late to confront the evidence and start healing. And perhaps that's the most beautiful paradox of all, that in a courtroom built on conflict, we find connection. In stories born from pain, we discover purpose. Because when Judge Lauren Lake says, "Truth changes everything," she doesn't mean it destroys, she means it redeems. When the final verdict of truth has been spoken, when the DNA report has settled the question that haunted an entire family, what remains is not the science. It is the silence that follows it, the kind of silence that reshapes lives. The courtroom may be empty, but its air still carries the energy of confession, redemption, and renewal. Judge Lauren Lake remains seated for a moment after the cameras fade, her pen resting softly on her notes. Around her, echoes of testimony swirl like ghosts, voices that spoke of betrayal, hope, and the need for closure. This is where the courtroom becomes sacred ground, a space where the deepest human emotions meet the solemn discipline of law. For most people, a DNA test is a quest for answers, but what they often discover is something much larger, a reckoning. The science tells them who, but the experience teaches them why. It's why people regret taking DNA tests, because while they bring clarity, they also bring accountability. The truth cannot simply be known, it must be lived. And yet, Judge Lauren Lake knows that even in regret, there is redemption. Truth may hurt, but it purifies. It is the single force that transforms confusion into direction and pain into peace. That's why she calls her courtroom not just a place of judgment, but a stage of transformation. It's where evidence becomes enlightenment. It's where families who've lived years in emotional exile come face to face with their real selves. And it's where the relationship between law and justice becomes visible. Not through legal jargon, but through raw human emotion. Her approach is not about condemnation, but confrontation, confronting the lies that people tell themselves, confronting the fear of truth, and confronting the pain of acceptance. Because in the end, no one truly wins a case like this. They simply find a new version of themselves on the other side of it. In this double episode, a grieving mother facing her son's past, an ex-lover defending her child's truth, a small boy caught between memory and identity, we see not just a legal proceeding, but a universal parable. It's the kind of story that could be analyzed in a Truth Changes Everything podcast episode, or discussed on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where emotional authenticity meets legal integrity. Because what Judge Lauren Lake demonstrates case after case is that justice without empathy is meaningless. The courtroom becomes a living philosophy lesson in jurisprudence, the study of not just what the law is, but what it should be. Philosophers often argue whether the concept of justice comes from fairness, morality, or divine reason. Here, under Judge Lake's gavel, justice emerges from compassion. It's justice with a heartbeat, when the grieving mother says, through tears, that she no longer needs a DNA test to define her grandson, that love has already done that. She embodies what legal scholars often miss. Justice is not only about right and wrong, it's about belonging. That is what the concept of justice in jurisprudence truly means. Not the mere application of statutes, but the restoration of wholeness. Truth as redemption throughout her career, Judge Lauren Lake has turned the courtroom into a place of celebrate recovery testimonies, where truth-telling becomes healing. Every confession is a kind of resurrection. Every DNA result, no matter how shocking, opens a door to peace that denial had long kept locked. It mirrors the same spirit found in recovery communities